All right, thank you very much for coming tonight. So we will start the community forum now. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Kenneth Poon. I'm the Asian Community Aid Services Health Promotion Coordinator. It's so great to see some familiar and new faces for tonight's forum. Tonight's forum topic is building Black, Indigenous people of colors solidarity against racism. Tonight, we have 5 amazing and established speakers on the panel and an acclaimed friends and peers of mine, Christian Hui, as the moderator. Just in case, if anybody don't know much about Christians, let me give you a little bit about his background. Christian is a queer, positive Asian settler from Hong Kong. He is a former ACAS staff. He holding various roles from community engagement coordinator to Ontario Positive Asian coordinator as well. He is a community activist, especially very focusing on undetectable equal untransmittable, U equal U campaign. He also advocates for people in the GPA and MIPA, created involvement people living with HIV and meaningful engagement people living with HIV. He also passionate about his harm reduction as well as health equity. Christian presently is pursuing his PhD degree at Ryerson University. So without further ado, I will pass it back on to Alex just to simplify some ground rules and housekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And again, thank you for joining. My name is Alex. I use he, him pronouns. I am a support worker from ACAS. Before we start the forum, we just want to kindly remind you that please use your mute button when you're not speaking, just to eliminate background noise. And we do have a Q&A section later in the panel section. And feel free to put add your question to the chat section here on Zoom, or you can just ask your question using the raise hand function. Also, we have another platform for you to ask question. You can go to www.menti.com here, and use the code 67676767. So you can drop your question there anonymously, and I will be monitoring the Zoom chat and the Menti platform as well. So these are two platforms that you can do the question here. And last but not least, this online forum will be recorded and we're live streaming on YouTube, just as a reminder. Thank you very much. And I will pass it over to Christian.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Kenneth, for the warm introduction. Also, thank you, ACAS, for inviting me to facilitate this esteemed panel of BIPOC people living in HIV activists. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the land that we are on. We would like to acknowledge that Asian Community Aid Services, ACAS, has the privilege of working on this sacred land that has been home and hunting ground to indigenous peoples for thousands of years, including the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land as settlers and newcomers. And after the land acknowledgement, I just want to quickly provide an introduction to our lovely team of panelists tonight. So I'll first start off in alphabetical order. First, we have Claudia Medina. Claudia, if you can do a wave to folks. Claudia has worked in the HIV sector for over 26 years, and she has worked at PASAN, the Prisoners Action Support Network, for a total of 4 years, providing educational workshops to prisoners, and for the past 3 years as the program manager. Claudia has strong commitment to abolition, decarceration, and provides systemic advocacy in order to create support and services for those who are incarcerated and who have been, lived in institutions and prisons. Much of her work has also focused on engaging and supporting racialized communities, specifically immigrants and newcomers who are living with HIV. Claudia is also a co-founder of Latinos Positivos. Thanks for joining us, Claudia. Next, we have Jacqueline Fleet, Jackie. Jacqueline is a Métis woman and a proud mother of 2 boys from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Jackie is a community consultant with several different agencies in Manitoba. She is currently working on several different projects to combat HIV and STBBIs in Manitoba. Jackie has been living positively for over 10 years and is an advocate and support for Indigenous women and men who live positively. Jackie is also a national spokesperson and is well known within the HIV/AIDS movement across Canada. Tansi, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Manitoba. Next, we have Jade. Jade Electra is a Toronto drag recording artist, also known as DJ Relentless. Originally from Tampa, Florida, she and her husband have been producing events to create safer spaces for the HIV positive community and to raise funds and awareness for local AIDS service organizations since 2007. And including, some of the events you may know, the Post-TO events at Buddies at Bad Times Theater. Besides her AIDS activism, Jade is also known for her single Undetectable, a remake from Nat King Cole's classic Unforgettable. And you can also show some love for Jade Electra by subscribing to her playlist on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Nice to have you, Jade. You look fantastic. Next, we have Hiro. So Hiro is a non-binary Egyptian-Canadian queer person who uses the pronouns they and them. They are the founder of RAHA program at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, ASAP, and the Middle Eastern Nights, and LGBTQ plus Middle Eastern Party. They have been living with HIV since 2007 and have made it their life mission to be an advocate and voice for many people of color who come from backgrounds of struggles, self-acceptance, and cultural and racial oppression. They also have a passion to talk about faith and sexuality. Their alter ego and drag persona name is Cleopatra and was also formerly known as Father Hiro. Hiro, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And last and not least, we have Justin. Justin Anantawan is a Chinese Thai Canadian working in Kenya as a photojournalist and HIV outreach worker at ACAS and also in Kenya, and doing HIV testing as well. In Canada, Justin, as you may know, he volunteers at ACAS and is a national ambassador for the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. A gay man living with HIV, Justin is passionate about fighting HIV stigma and making life better for people living with the virus. In his free time, Justin enjoys watching cooking shows and spending time with his adopted Kenyan son and grandson, baby Kane. So here we have our esteemed panel. And before we move on to the discussion for tonight, we also just want to take a moment to recognize the passing of the belated Derek Yee, of whom many of you know. Derek was a former ACAS board member, mentor, friend, peer, colleague for many. And I would also just light a candle in his remembrance. As well, for folks who know, who may know already, Ontario Positive Asians will be holding a community celebration of life event for people living with HIV next Wednesday. And I wish can share the info in the chat box later, and you can register for the event. We are also very grateful that Jackie has offered to do a smudging in honor of Derek. So I'll pass this on to you, Jackie.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Flett. I'm from the traditional land of the Treaty 1 territories, and we're here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, home of the Anishinaabe, First Nation, Ojibwe, home of the Métis Nation, as well as the Cree and Ojibwe and Dene. I would like to take time to smudge for Derek and the memory of Derek. We use as a smudge in the First Nations community to hold our prayers and to lift them high. When the smoke reaches the sky, they go straight to Creator. And it's for healing purposes and also with cleansing and to remove negativity. So anybody with all your thoughts and prayers and even good well wishes to Derek may do so in these prayers that are about to be given to him. And I've already lit the smudge. So those prayers will all go to Derek, and he has heard every one of you, and you know, like he will be forever remembered, and the prayers are going up to him, and he's going to get them and receive them and everything that you told him and you've honored about him. So Miigwech from the Prairie Provinces, and in to Derek's name, I'm going to be leaving the smudge for the rest of the evening, and then I will go put it and place it by somewhere in the ground by a tree where it's clean. So no one's going to disturb those prayers, and those prayers will be for him, and it's sacred and honor in our community. And thank you very much for letting me be a part of Derek's memory.
Miigwech, Jackie, for the lovely smudge and doing this in honor for Derek. Okay, so we'll next move on to our, the meat of the night. But before we go get into the panel, we just want to engage you folks and some interactive questions. So because tonight is an event held in Asian Heritage Month, is about intercultural BIPOC resilience, we would like to ask you, if you are able to, please share one item that holds cultural significance to you. And you can just quickly type that in the chat box. We can also take maybe 1 to 3 volunteers if you wish to talk a little about this item and share with the rest of the group. Please let us know. If you do, please use the raise hand function so I know who to call on. So maybe I will lead by example. My cultural item of significance. So I have this amulet that my mom gave me, and she's a Buddhist, and today is kind of a significant day for the Buddhists. So, that's a cultural item that I would want to share with you today. I'm not sure if other folks want to, do a little sharing. Would love to hear from you. And if folks are a little shy, you can share as the panel proceeds as well. Okay, I don't see anyone typing in the chat box for now, but hopefully you will. Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll actually get into the panel discussion for tonight. And Alex, before I go, I just want to mention to folks that you can also go to Mentimeter if you have any questions that you want to ask anonymously. So I'm going to type this in the chat box. Oh, it's there already. Thank you, Alex. So panelists, are you ready? Because yes, I think I am ready.
Bring it on.
So we have 3 kind of topics to ask you for the night. And the first topic is about honoring cultural strength and engaging in reconciliation. Why we kind of want to ask you questions about this is because as racialized settlers, we are occupying the lands of the First Peoples. And, there's been a lot of anti-Indigenous racism that's been going on through, since contact and through the residential school systems. And then also, there's been also a lot of anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, anti-BIPOC racism happening. So as racialized settlers, I'm just wondering, what does honoring cultural strength mean to you? And then also, what does engaging in reconciliation mean to you and or to the PAWS community that you belong to? Would anyone of you like to start first?
Sure.
Yes.
I always have something to say. So it's very interesting because how I learned about engagement and reconciliation within my own culture is understanding my own background as an Egyptian and what it means to be Egyptian. And I learned that through indigenous people around me. They're the one, it's funny because it's my indigenous friends who educated me about my own history. And that's how I learned about reconciliation and understanding colonization and what it means. So that led me to pushing to learn how to decolonize myself. And by doing that, I've learned to accept my skin color, my race, my culture, and really embrace it, as opposed to coming here as settlers. We're also taught very often to try to forget our culture and try to mix in. And that I learned along the way that it wasn't good for my mental health. And then I started learning, I started seeing it as a repetitive behavior among the Middle Eastern community. And when I learned about reconciliation and decolonization in particular, that's when I started engaging it more and allowing people to say, no, embrace your culture. Don't let anyone erase that from you. And here's the reason why. Because when you do that, you are told that you're worth less, that your race, your culture, your background is less, and it isn't. Because and that's what colonization taught many people from generation to generation. Egypt was colonized, Africa was colonized, India was colonized. So it really affects a lot of people at home. But here, the resiliency of indigenous people is what is so empowering, because the pharaohs are no longer around because we let that take over. Right. So here you have indigenous people, they're still around, they're still fighting, and they're growing in numbers. And it's fantastic to see after a lot of the cultural genocide that they've been through as well. So this is how I engaged in it, and how I got to really learn about it is by going to my own roots itself, learning about that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Hiro. I mean, like being able to hold that cultural pride and, just staying strong and true to your roots is so important. I'm just wondering if other panelists, whether you would like to, join into this topic. Jade, I think you want to speak.
Oh, am I unmuted? Yes. Wasn't sure. Well, the first thing that I wanted to say is I partially on your thing about a cultural moment to share or whatever. It's really, I think it's a really sad thing for me, but I didn't actually appreciate my own culture as an African American until I went to Rome. Walking in the ruins there really, for some reason, made me think of where I came from and what that was all about. So coming to Canada from America, from the USA, we're not taught about the genocide of the indigenous people. That's not taught in schools. So I really didn't know that much about it until I got here. And I've been here for over a decade now, and just it's kind of mind-blowing to think of all of the stuff that's happened, and that they're still here, at least, thank God, and that they're still thriving in some capacity. So I think it's important. It's important for us to stand in solidarity and help everyone understand who we are as people. The colonization kind of wipes clean everything that's in its path. And we need to remind everyone who we are, where we came from, what our history is, and the importance of that. So that was my little 2 cents.
Great, thank you so much, Jade. And then I will move on to Claudia. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. Well, very much like I echo a lot of what Hiro and Jade has said already. In regards to the Latinx culture, I would say that decolonization needs to happen in that culture as well. So there is very much a form of white supremacy that can happen. And a lot of it stemming from, people not wanting to recognize our roots, right? So our roots definitely stem from indigenous folks. They definitely, they stem from, Afro-Colombian folks. And it's that's just Africa, that's just specific to Colombia, right? So I'm just like, what I notice in my particular experience has been that sometimes there's a denial in a sense that that are of our roots, right? And a lot of it does come from internal racism, and a lot of it also comes from the fact that, accepting that might possibly bring them more racism, or accepting that would possibly, make them feel less than when they're already a person of color, right? And so those are kind of the stumbling blocks that I found in the Latinx community. And you know, I also have to say and mention my privilege, right? Because I was raised here, right? So I don't speak with an accent. I could definitely pass as white European. You know, my skin is lighter. However, here I am being the one that's speaking to friends, family, and my community who, you know, are not settled, that, you know, have settled here by immigration, and you know, much of my family immigrated here, right? And so that's a little uncomfortable sometimes, where it's like, who is this privileged, you know, person talking to me about embracing my Indigenous roots? But it really is something that I feel is missing in the Latinx community, which really, it's really sad. Really, it's sad, you know, to be able to like accept that us as, you know, identified brown folks are gonna actually be racist towards Indigenous folks.
Mm-hmm. And thanks, Claudia. I think you touch on, you know, such important points. And, you know, I guess when we talk about racism, there's also the shadeism, and, you know, like it's such a, you know, broad topic that we can actually spend the whole, you know, day talking about this. But I also want to acknowledge that, you know, want to hear from Justin. You know, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, so I think like I want to speak on like reconciliation and that process in terms of the legacy of colonialism on the Indigenous community and HIV, because as a lot of us know, HIV rates are higher disproportionately. So I think one of the statistics I read said, like, I think the population right now of Canada is made up about 3% Indigenous folks, yet the cases of HIV is 8%, 10% Indigenous. And so there's a disproportionate amount, number of Indigenous folks who are HIV positive, and a lot of that, you know, I has a lot to do with the legacy of colonialism, right? Because I think the, you know, I think the World Health Organization talked about social determinants of health, right? And a lot of the social determinants that affect HIV rates in populations include, you know, the level of economic marginalization they're experiencing, gaps within gender equality, like a whole bunch of different things, and mental health, for example. And there's been just the legacy of colonialism has had a very negative effect, I believe, on the Indigenous community, which have led to higher rates of HIV. So I think, like, within the process of, you know, of reconciliation, there, you know, we also need to address the legacy of colonialism on HIV, you know, which I think is really important. But at the same time, recognize too that I think a lot of the social determinants that are used don't reflect a lot of ways in which I think, like, within Indigenous communities, you know, health is often looked upon as a very holistic thing, you know, like physical matched with, you know, the emotional side, spiritual side of a person. And I feel like a lot of the social determinants that people use to talk about HIV don't reflect that, right? Even so, I think in the process, we need, in the process of reconciliation, also trying to find ways of addressing HIV within Indigenous communities. We need to take that into account as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Justin. And I think, you know, like, thank you all panelists for, you know, providing your insights on this as a settler myself, I can definitely say I had internalized racism when I, first moved to North America. And even after I turned HIV positive for a number of years, I did not want to come to access services at ACAS. And then years after I did, and things started to change. And I think, it's such a great moment in my life that I was able to be accepted just for who I am. And I didn't need to like pretend or to strive to be, this group with, of folks with like different types of privileges that I did not necessarily belong. I think, tonight is such a great event because we have Jackie from the Indigenous community joining us. And I think as a, member of the BIPOC community, especially, in Toronto, as diverse as Toronto is as a city, I think, opportunities like these where, racialized folks can actually learn alongside and, stand in solidarity with Indigenous community members is so precious. So I just want to thank you all for this wonderful segment. So now as we head into the topic 2, attendees, we want you to kind of engage you a little bit. So we're wondering if you can actually share one word on cultural strength or on reconciliation. You can write one word about your thoughts, your feelings on the subject, and then it could kind of trigger some good, train of thought or potential discussions for later on. So I encourage you to do that. In the meantime, we'll go into the second topic for the panelists. So this will be around, the lived experiences as a, Black, Indigenous people, person of color, person living with HIV. So to the panelists, as people living with HIV/AIDS, how have you navigated around systemic and institutional racism within the positive community or even the broader community? I would maybe choose Jackie first because, Jackie didn't get the chance to speak at the last topic, but Jackie, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Sure. So in Manitoba, there's a high rate, just like you guys were talking about, just like Justin was saying, a high rate of HIV in the Indigenous community and here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I think a lot has to do with, the lack of, like, there's just barriers there. Being Indigenous, you already have the racism brought against you. So automatically in Manitoba, being Indigenous, it already has a downfall as is. And can you just tell me a little bit more about the question?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, just in terms of as a BIPOC person living with HIV, you spoke about the types of systemic and institutional racism.
Well, and in Manitoba, it's a very small community, and in northern communities, there some of them can be outcast as soon as they tell people that they're positive. There's a very it's taboo in our Indigenous communities to be open on even about sexual health issues. And as well here in Manitoba, it's such a small community, there's only 2 HIV clinics that can be accessed here. So the access to care and linkage is a major downplay here for Manitobans as well.
Mm-hmm. And I guess this kind of speaks to the importance of cultural safety, in terms of the types of services and programs that, make people feel comfortable accessing. And I'm wondering if, I can maybe jump to other panelists so you can chime in on this topic. Hiro, would you like to go?
Sure. Again, I have something to say about everything we're going to talk about. I mean, for me, navigating it at first, especially as a person living with HIV, was a horrible experience. Not only because I was a person of color, but being Middle Easterner, a lot of the ASOs available at the time, that's in 2007, it's not that long ago when you think about it, was predominantly for the cisgender gay white male. But on top of it all, I was a substance user. I was, I actually, my English wasn't even that good. I was predominantly more French and Arabic speaker at the time. So it was all very, very hard to navigate and try to figure out where to go, who to talk to, which doctor to find. So navigating that took a lot of work for me because I didn't know who to talk to or which doctor to find out. So because of there was no level of resources available for me at the time, I just went in and with my eyes closed and kind of hoped for the best. That's how I navigated it at first. But that also empowered me to realize a lot of the boundaries and limitations that are in place. And especially when I did my Indigenous cultural safety training, I can't even imagine the systemic racism that's faced by Indigenous people. And me being Middle Eastern or Egyptian, I could pass. I still pass. It depends. During summertime, I'm definitely more tan, and this is where things go down south. But also, after 9/11, that was a whole different ballgame because everyone always assumes that I'm Muslim, and I'm not, which it didn't have an impact, but it also did because growing up Christian, Egyptian, it's part of our identity. And so to find an organization, let alone that will adhere to Middle Eastern people, was predominantly for Muslim Arabs, which I wasn't. So that was very hard. And that's when I decided, hey, I can't navigate. I managed to figure out the system and find out my networks and so on. So we started the RAHA program at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, so helped all of the Middle Eastern community navigate that instead. So that was my experience with that and learning how to navigate it. And now that I'm with Action Positive, understanding how the Francophone community, that's just a language barrier right there, but but also the Black Francophone community, refugees, newcomers, asylum seekers who come here, it's such a whole different ballgame that we're still not good at. Like you'd think a country as Canada would have progressed somehow, but we're not, especially in Toronto where everything is just in English, really. And to find French services or somewhere that understand culture, race, sexual identities, and so on, it is still like looking for a needle in a haystack. So it's I navigated, but we still have a lot of work to do.
And I totally agree, Hiro. And I think it's so great that you were able to, like jumpstart the program for Middle Eastern folks living in HIV as been such a, underserved population and service gap in the community for so long. I saw Justin had his hand up, so I'm going to go to Justin and then I'm going to go to the ladies after. So Justin, you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I think like in terms of like if I have to talk about like navigating HIV as as an Asian person, I think I in my journey, I've realized the importance of seeing like in terms of finding community, finding the people who are part of your culture. Because I think like when I first got diagnosed, it took me, I felt very, very isolated for a long time. I kind of didn't know why. In the sense that like, I would go to some groups, support groups, and I would try to, get support in that way. But for some reason, like there was always kind of a disconnect for me because I don't know what it was exactly. But it's interesting because when I started doing my internship at ACAS as a social worker and then getting involved in the as a PHA within that the Asian community, my community, I realized, wow, like there was something so powerful about being in a group of people who look like me, who hold the same cultural values as me, and having that solidarity. And it really helped me in many ways to heal, I think, from the trauma of getting diagnosed. And as well, talking to other people who, again, like, who I could relate to more based on culture. What I want to say though is, like, I feel like as an Asian Canadian, I'm very privileged myself because I was born here. My first language is English, and I realized, like, within the Asian community, there's still a lot of gaps in terms of HIV outreach, because, you know, there's the language gap, especially for newcomers, and I feel like a lot of the materials that we have and the outreach we have needs to address the needs of folks, Asian folks, or especially newcomers, right? But I really appreciate a lot of the organizations, for example, like Black Cap, and I think ASAP, addressing the HIV within the Black community as well as South Asian community, because I think those cultural connections and community are just extremely important, I think, in fighting HIV, but as well for PHAs to have a very strong sense of community. You know, having those cultural bonds are so important, and it's helped me a lot, having that sense of community with ACAS.
Right. Thank you, Justin. And I now want to turn to Claudia. Claudia, do you have anything you would like to add on this topic?
Hey, folks. Yes, for sure. I mean, I'm going to be real with you right now. I mean, I tested positive in 1994. And so if you can imagine, the culture during that time in the AIDS movement was primarily, white, gay men who were testing positive, who was the majority. And, so it was difficult in the sense for me, because I honestly wavered. I didn't know where I belonged. And for sure, what I did notice in the majority of the AIDS service organizations was that there was white supremacy, like all across the board, right? So I just want to be real on that point, because I think, a lot of organizations have done a lot of work in regards to that. And we still have a long way to go, for some organizations as well, right? I think in the sense of, fighting systemic racism within, the Latinx culture, that's where Latinos Positivos grew from, right? So, Latinos Positivos was basically a fuck you to white supremacy, and basically saying, hey, like, Latinos are here. And at that time it was like 2016. So that was like the AIDS conference. And so a lot of folks were showing up at PWA kind of lost and positive, and, saying that they wanted to be in Canada because of all the horrible things and the horrible treatment back home in Latin America. So that's how it evolved. It evolved because of the community, right? They made it happen, and me and the other founders just basically, essentially used our privilege in a sense to be like, hey, and that's what it is. It's, if you have privilege, you should be resisting the system, resisting, what actually exists to break that down. And so I feel, like I've done that with every organization that I've worked at, and including Kasan, in the sense of like, us recognizing the needs of prisoners, who are BIPOC, you know what I mean? Because that's not anything that's respected within the prison system. So, if you're a Muslim, you get, things taken away from you, or, basic human rights, in the sense of like, you practicing your religion, you're denied to be able to do that. right? Having products for your hair or things like that are denied, right? And so, yeah, it's constantly having to challenge the system that exists to tear, BIPOC communities down.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And, that is such an important point. I mean, like talking about this system and the structures that, work against BIPOC folks, right? And as we know, BIPOC folks are overrepresented within the prison system. And, for people living in HIV, with the HIV stigma, I think the need for support for folks, who are within the prison system is actually so great. Jade, I'm wondering if you would have anything you'd like to add to this topic.
Yeah, and in no way, Claudia, is this a contest, but I got diagnosed in '90. So it was a different time then. You did not tell anyone about your status. And as a matter of fact, part of what happened to me that year, I had went to New York for an audition for a movie. I came back, got tested, found out I was positive, and made the decision that I was going to leave. I lived in Tampa, Florida at that time. Made the decision to move to New York because I couldn't tell my family. I couldn't tell the friends that I knew. I just needed a complete new start. And believe it or not, the cultural thing that happened for me was actually moving to New York and meeting other Black gay people, and literally stepping into what was left of the cast of Paris is Burning. So those were the people who took me in when I first got there and taught me most of what I needed to know to survive. I did not have any, even though I had heard of Callan Lord in New York City, I refused to take any meds because of all the people I knew who were on AZT, or you say Z here, they were dying. And I was like, I'm not taking that. So I literally did not go on meds until 2005. I wasn't a drinker, I didn't do drugs or any of those things. So I was kind of fine. But by the time 2005 hit, my T cells had completely dropped down below 200 and something needed to be done. So as a Black gay man, moving to New York was probably the best thing I could have done for myself. By the time I moved here to Canada, I sort of kind of had it all together in my head of how to represent myself, what I was going to do, how to be an activist, what to say, all of that stuff. New York taught me all of that, working with GMHC and the Harvey Milk School, with youth, that kind of stuff. Those were the things that kind of put me on the right path. So that's it.
Can I add to that, Jade? And I think it's amazing because I could relate to a lot of what Jade said. I mean, I moved to Montreal, and that did not help my situation. If anything, it made myself worse because I partied like a rock star. But it's when I went to Africa and I stayed in Eastern Africa for 3 years. That's when I learned how to accept my status, and that's where I got the tools. And it's very interesting because I'm learning that a lot of us had to reinvent ourselves to be able to navigate the system and learn how to navigate the system and have the tools. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you, all of you, for an amazing, responses to this second topic. In an effort to engage the participants, we would like you to share an area that you feel the aid service organization sector can do to improve so they can better serve your needs as a person living in HIV. I know organizations are often doing the best, and doing a lot to support us in the community, but there's also always room for improvement as well. So here's your opportunity to speak your thoughts. And if you can type that in the chat box, that'd be great. And then we are running a little behind schedule, but we have our last topic we want to, ask the esteemed panel. So, given that, anti-BIPOC racism has gained quite a lot of attention, and the media has actually been covering it quite a lot within the past 2 years, I'm just wondering if you can actually speak from your experience, what have you been able to do to counter, racism within your own community? Because, we, as BIPOC folks, we face racism from the dominant group, but there's a lot of also, lateral violence going on, and intergroup types of racism, right? So in an effort to build solidarity amongst BIPOC folks, what have you found to be effective? I'm going to maybe start with Justin first, and then I'm just trying to like randomly pick someone and kind of shuffle up the order. So Justin, would you like to go first? Can't hear you, Justin.
Yeah, so the question is like, how have I worked to try to combat like internalized racism, like internal oppression within like my own community, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think like a lot of it just has to like for example, I think what needs to happen, like what really helps within our own communities is just creating spaces where we can be together, right? Because I think like for example, like within the like the Chinese community, from my experience, I just feel sometimes there's a lot of like self-deprecation, right? Because of the ways like we're seen. Like for example, especially within the gay community, right? There's often like a lot of stereotypes about Asians, like in terms of just being very submissive, for example. And also there's also like a lot of the just a lot of stereotypes made about Asian folks. And so I think like one of the things that is just really important is to create a sense of community so we're together, right? And we really can address a lot of these issues. And so like one of the things I find in my own experience is like helping to organize forums or community events that bring us together to talk about these issues, right? And I think that's the most important thing. That for me is a really important thing to do, because when we're separate and we're not together, I think it just creates a lot of disunity, right? And I think, so I think that's really the most important thing, just bringing people together, right? To talk about these issues that we're experiencing. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Justin. And I think, just creating a safer space like this,
yeah, exactly.
Having tonight, I think is a great start. Jackie, haven't heard from you for the last little bit due to my fault, but I'm just wondering, do you have some ideas as to how we can like build this BIPOC solidarity against racism?
Definitely. With the BIPOC community and the Indigenous community, we get the most racism and systematic barriers in Canada. We have to come together as one, and because we live in a multicultural country, and being positive, we already face stigmas brought against us. And I think it's all about education and, combating stigma and all those isms such as racism, colonization, and I think we have to bring it at the forefront and not make it such a taboo subject, like an uncomfortable subject. And even about our own sexuality and being positive, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And we need to start combating racism, and we need to start coming together as one, because we all have equal rights and opportunities in Canada, and we are multicultural. And I think it's really beautiful to embrace one another's culture and cultural differences as well. Miigwech.
Language, Jackie, thank you so much. I will hear, keep that in my heart for sure. Claudia, why don't we come to you?
I just had it, and okay. So welcome to 27 years and hand, if you all know what I'm talking about. So cognitive issues. So I would say very bluntly, as I normally do, is that we need to look at the organizations that we represent and the organizations that we work in. And we have to start thinking, in regards to what that looks like in the hierarchy, right? So that is something that reflects, very much, if we're talking about reconciliation for Indigenous folks, if we're talking about anti-Black racism, what does the hierarchy look like, right? And Michelle, my wonderful, long time, friend there that we've known each other for quite some time, made a valid point. So not only the hierarchy in our organizations, but what's the hierarchy in regards to our funders, right? And what does that look like, right? And what are the components? And are we reflecting, anti-Black racism and Indigenous racism within the organizations, within our funding bodies? So I would say there's that. Those are the changes that need to be made within organizations. It's not just hiring BIPOC staff, right? Or getting more BIPOC volunteers, right? So it's basically putting your money where your mouth is, right? And saying, oh, okay, what does actually anti-Black and Indigenous racism look like in our organizations, and what things are we going to be able to do on all levels to address it?
Thank you, muchas gracias, Claudia. Next, we'll jump to Jade. Jade, would you like to pitch in on this topic?
Sure. Ironically for me, I left New York and came here, and that is when I discovered racism within my own community as far as Black people. I am an American, and most of the community here is Caribbean. So the weird thing is I had a following as Jade Electra, so they knew who I was from my recordings. They knew me as a DJ. I'm DJ Relentless. But when they met me and found out that I wasn't Caribbean or I wasn't whatever, suddenly I was an outcast. So, and it still sort of stands today. I'm respected because of the work that I do. But when I created Postio and we started doing the events, it was to bring people together. It was to bring HIV positive people together in a social atmosphere, and also their allies. We wanted everyone to come to these events because you can't hate someone that you don't know, or like that once you know them, you can't hate them. So once you start knowing people and building that community, then people can start, helping each other and supporting each other. So that was the point of Postio when we started it. Unfortunately, COVID came along and shut down our events. But hopefully, we'll get back to that again. But we still do our Postio Awards where we honor 10 people every year. So, I just wanted to mention about the racism within our own communities can sometimes be some of the worst. I'm from the South, Florida, in the States. The racism is very out in the open there. And if you talk to a Southerner, they'll tell you, I appreciate that racism better because it's out in the open. When you start moving north, it's kind of hidden and behind closed doors. And that's the worst. So, I know where I stand in the South.
Thanks, Jade. And, having lived in the US, I totally agree with what you say. Down there, people can't say it in your face, whereas here it's much more muted. And sometimes you just have to guess, or kind of like just, tell it to the face and tell them, hey, I know you're, saying this about me, thinking this about me. That's not right. So anyway, Hiro, would you like to jump in on this?
Yes, I mean, the question came up and I wrote like a full page of notes, but I'm not going to say it all. Because one of the first things that I always want to remind people, not because you're a person of color, it does not make you not racist. Right. So this is so important to remember. And by remembering that, I mean, being within my own Middle Eastern community, one of the biggest examples of fighting internalized racism within us, it's when the Black Lives Matter movement really made a movement last year after the George Floyd murder. And some Middle Easterns were like, hey, how about Arab Lives Matter? And that's when I jumped in and I said, shut your mouth. No. How about Black Arab Lives Matter first? Let's figure that one out before we could say just Arab Lives Matter, because we have the problem of shadism already within our own community. We have the problem of not recognizing Black people within our community. As a matter of fact, there's more new recent Egyptian movies that came out on Netflix depicting Black people as stupid and the various stereotype like Black Arabs. And it's like, why are we still there? So what I remind people is start in your own backyard before you jump out there and try to make a difference anywhere else. And that's what I had to do with myself. I mean, I grew up Islamophobic, racist as hell, uneducated, uncultured. And I've had to, if it wasn't going through HIV, if it wasn't for my substance use and homelessness, I don't think I would have ever learned any of that. But the one big lesson I've learned to break down that internalized racism is to start in your own backyard. And that means having that conversation with your family members and not letting grandpa go with that excuse of saying, oh, you know, that's just the way grandpa is. Nuh-uh. Not okay. So stand up for it. And that's so important to do that as opposed to starting big and so on. The other thing that that's important is, and it's, for instance, when I worked with indigenous groups in the Durham region, for especially, I was invited as part of the Indigenous Awareness Week in June. And one of the things that we talked about, and also I host a show called The Queer Bunch, actually, Jade, Electra, Alfonso King is a co-host on there. And what we had an episode in September about Indigenous reconciliation and decolonization. And one of the advices that were given to me was stop reinventing the wheel on something that's already there. So if you go to an indigenous community, don't try to make up a movement for them. They already have the materials and the movement, because if you try to do it otherwise, it is a form of racism on its own and oppression, where you feel like you're bigger than your own. So start in your own backyard. That's my advice, and that's the one that I followed in my own community. So yeah,
Thanks, Hiro. And we're just a little behind schedule, but we have received, we saw a comment in the chat and we received an anonymous question. So maybe I'll try to merge both of the questions together. So I know Ben kind of raised a question about just the issue about having kind of a safer spaces for specific communities, right? Like cultural safer spaces. But then, you know, I think the question is that in some ways segregating ourselves in a sense? The anonymous question we received was that, you know, the person asked, you know, is fighting racism and discrimination being realistic? It sounds very often that we have to deal with something or view something as politically correct. So that was, you know, a statement that was posed by one of the anonymous participants. So I just want to throw it out there to panelists. Like, what do you think? You know, in terms of, while we're talking about the need to build BIPOC solidarity, you know, is there utility to also have our own cultural spaces? And then, you know, is fighting racism and discrimination too big of a task? Is it, you know, can we actually address it? Or is it, you know, a people pressure to act in a certain way so that they can be politically correct? Justin and then Jade.
I just want to address Ben's question, which is, building our own community and staying together. Isn't that segregating ourselves to just address racism? So like kind of hearkening back to what we were talking about in terms of internalized oppression and internalized racism, a lot of that stems from the idea that the culture of white and European folks is superior to the culture of a person of color. And so the reason why it's important to have these spaces, these communities, is so that we can come together as community and celebrate our culture, right? Because without those kinds of communities, like there can be a separation amongst us. And then with, with a lot of the white supremacy within our society, it can make us come to a point where we don't see our culture as something significant, as something beautiful, as something that should be celebrated. So I think that's why it's important to have those community spaces, right? Not trying to say that, we're trying to separate ourselves and say, oh yeah, we're different from you. What we're trying to do when we create those spaces is not necessarily to segregate us from other people, but to celebrate our own culture so we can take pride in our culture, right? And to challenge a lot of the notions that a lot of folks of color have amongst themselves, that our culture is not good enough, right? Our culture is not something to be celebrated. Our culture is something to be ashamed of, right? So that's why I think it's important to have building our community in that way, not so much to separate ourselves, but to bring us together so that we have, so that we can combat a lot of those notions. Yeah.
And that's why I love Asian Heritage Month so much. And Jade, I know, Jade, I know you had your hand up. I'll hand it to you.
Honestly and truly, I sort of feel like being HIV positive, that's a culture within itself. We experience the trauma of finding out the news, figuring out how to navigate life. What are we going to do for the rest of our lives? Are we going to live? All of those things. So that's a culture within itself. Bringing to the table your actual identity of where you're from and your HIV, it is very, very important that we combat racism. So for the anonymous question, it's like not taking care of an infection. If you don't take care of it, it will kill you. And that's exactly what racism is doing. It's a cancer on our planet, and it's spread constantly. And we have to address it. We have to fix it. And if you don't, it just grows and it becomes the norm. So it is so important that we address racism.
Thank you, Hiro.
Yeah, Jade, this was an amazing analogy. I really, really, really love that, and I'm going to use that from now on. Thank you. I'll make sure to quote you for saying that. But also, I want to bring into attention, I hear a lot of those comments, and because people are also exhausted. So I want to recognize understanding that it is exhausting. So imagine being on the front lines constantly doing this. It's even more exhausting. So the reason why it's exhausting is because not everyone is jumping on board as quickly as we would like them to be. So we have those expectations in place that we need to kind of let go of those expectations and just let things happen, but continue to fight together with the hope. And continue to have that hope that we will meet that goal to stop the racism or to end that cancer. So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the bundle of answers.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for a lovely panel. I'm just a little over time, but before we wrap, we actually have a few giveaways for the audience. And so, but you must answer the correct, give the correct answer to the question. So we have 3 questions. Alex, am I doing this, or I guess I'm doing this with you?
Yeah, we can do it together.
Sure. Alex, do you want to go? Because I've been talking a lot.
Sure. So if you know the question, please raise your hand, and Christian can pick one to answer it. If you got it correct, we get a gift card for you. So the first question is, I posed it too early, but it's okay. On what First Nation is Toronto situated on?
Please raise your hand.
Anyone would like to answer? Raise your hand.
And what do you get in return if you answer correctly?
You will get a $15 gift card. It's not too bad. Anyone would like to try?
Yeah, I guess panelists, you can like
something like Mississauga language. I don't know how to pronounce that.
I recognize the voice. This must be Tim.
Tell me if my answer right or wrong first before I announce my name. I don't want to embarrass myself.
You're right. So you get the $15 gift card.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Great.
I do not know how to pronounce the name correctly. Not something like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
The new Credit First Nation. Thank you.
I see.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So we'll have the second one. Are you ready? All right. Here we go.
Oh, do you want me to ask?
Oh, it's here.
Okay, sure.
All right. So who is the Hong Kong-born journalist who eventually became the 26th Governor General of Canada? If you know the answer, raise your hand.
What's her name?
Adrian Clarkson.
Who is this?
It's Ben.
10?
Ben.
Ben.
Ben. Is it correct?
Hi, Ben. You are correct. So you get the second gift card.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. And now drum roll. We're at the last question.
Last question. This one might be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, this one.
I actually like this one. So question is, in what year did the government of Canada formally designate May as Asian Heritage Month?
No Google.
Anyone would like to try?
Come on, $15 gift cards waiting for you. Any takers? They add up to number 4. All the digits add up to number 4. That's a
2002.
Who is this?
2002, Colin.
Colin. You won!
That's great. You got it.
That was a guess, trust me.
You should get more often, Colin. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, with that said, we want to wrap up for the evening. I would, before I hand it back over to Kenneth, I just want to also remind folks that at the beginning, I said there will be a community memorial celebration of life for Derek Yee. I'll be posting the registration link in the chat box now. The event is open for people living with HIV and will be coordinated through Ontario Positive Agents. Now I hand it over back to Kenneth.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you to all the speakers. Definitely, I definitely heard a lot of different perspectives on how to strengthen our racism against racism. So I also want to thank you for all the audience for here participating tonight. Have a good evening, and please look out for our next community forum, which will be happening in July on post-COVID-19 long-haul support. So please watch for the detail, and we will send it to you sooner, probably in June. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, folks. Have a good night. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Okay, great. Kenneth, you have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.